We rate every trade and free agent signing from this trade period. And we start with probably the most unusual looking one, seeing a Silvagni not in a Carlton outfit. It is Jack Silvagni going to St Kilda. This was the first free agent signing, as Carlton received a round 1 compensation pick, which is the end of the first round, currently at pick 19, and St Kilda get Jack Silvagni. So for St Kilda, I give this a 7 out of 10. From what it looks like he's going to play as a defender. If he was very good at Carlton last year when he was a defender too, he got injured and pretty much ended his season. So I think he'd be a very handy defender to have in there for St Kilda, to add him with Wilkie and Taru, who's up and coming. Probably takes Caminini's spot. So it's going to help St Kilda quite a bit with that. So I think it's a solid 7 out of 10 for that. For Carlton, I gave him a 6 out of 10. I think it was a bit disappointing how they lost him. He was doing all right, as I said, at Carlton before the injuries happened. So he probably had still had a bit to play for in that defence for Carlton. So they didn't really want to get rid of him. And the fact that it's Silvagni just leaving Carlton, it just doesn't seem right. Even though he doesn't look too bad in the St Kilda Guernsey. But it's still a bit weird seeing Silvagni not at Carlton. But they did get pick 19, so it's not too bad. So that's why I give it a 6 out of 10 and not lower than that. I think getting an end of first round compensation for Silvagni is actually not bad from Carlton's point of view, and see if they can get anyone good for that. The next free agent signing was James Worpel going to Geelong, and Hawthorn receiving an end of second round compensation pick, which is currently at pick 39. So for this one, for Geelong, I'm giving them a 7 out of 10. It just gets a bit more depth in that midfield. Worpel, we've got to remember, he actually was a best and fairest winner at Hawthorn at one point. I think the last couple of years, his form dropped a little bit, but he definitely can add something to that Geelong midfield that already has Bailey Smith and Max Holmes and Tom Atkins. So add something a bit different to that midfield. So I think he'd be a very handy signing for Geelong. And normally when you go to Geelong, a lot of these players, they can go up to that next level, and Worpel could potentially be that. He's not actually that old himself, so I think it's definitely a good little signing for Geelong. So 7 out of 10. The Hawks, I've given them a 5 out of 10 for the rating. That I didn't think they wanted to lose him too much, but I think it's more that it's the end of second round pick. Didn't really get much compensation, I feel, for, as I said, a best and fairest winner. So give it a 5 out of 10. Just that depth player that was playing most of the year. The Hawks, they had to lose in the midfield, so it's a little bit disappointing for them. But they get pick 39, see what they do with that. Back to St Kilda with Tom De Koning going to the Saints for a round 1 compensation pick, which is currently at pick 9. So I've got this for a 7 out of 10 for St Kilda. I think it's a good signing. He's definitely got potential to be an All-Australian ruckman, the way he plays, how mobile he is, very good around the ground. The reason why I haven't put this a little bit higher, I think it's the amount of money that they're going to be giving him per season kind of puts me off a little bit for a ruckman. It's alleged is 1.7 million a season, which is ridiculous money for someone like a ruckman, even though he has the potential to be the leading ruck of the competition. And we'll see if this does make St Kilda a better side. If Marshall stays, how's it going to go between him and De Koning, splitting between the ruck and forward? Does that actually help St Kilda? Time will tell. So I've given it a 7 out of 10. For Carlton, I've given this 6 out of 10 for them. Obviously, they've lost, as I said, a potential gun ruckman in De Koning. But the reason I've kept it not too bad, just above average, is the fact they did get pick 9. So it's actually a pretty decent compensation for someone like De Koning, and they can get a decent player for that. As I said, disappointing for them to lose a ruckman, but they did bring in another ruckman, which we will talk about in this video. So let's see how that goes with that, but I've given them a 6 out of 10. Sam Draper has gone north to join Brisbane, and Essendon received the end of round 1 pick, which is currently at pick 20. So Brisbane, I've given them a 7 out of 10. They do need a solid ruckman, and Draper could definitely provide that. He did have some great moments while he was at Essendon. I think the big concern for me will be the injury, the Achilles injury that he had last season. How's that going to affect him? But the reason why I gave it a 7 is because they do need a ruckman, and I think Draper can provide that. I think it'd be a great replacement for Oscar McInerney, who retired, and I believe he's an upgrade over Darcy Fort. So that actually makes him a bit stronger. For Essendon, I gave him a 5 out of 10. They've just lost a ruckman. I know he's been injured, so that hasn't really changed too much from the 2025 season. But they did lose a ruckman. He was arguably their number 1 ruckman, so not ideal for Essendon. But they do get pick 20, which they could use, potentially get a good player out of it. Let's see what happens, but I give him a 5 out of 10. This free agent came out of nowhere. Get it? His name is Jacob Wehr, and I said Wehr. Feel free to leave this video if you hated that joke. Anyway, back to it. So Jacob Wehr's gone to Port Adelaide, and GWS received no compensation. Believe because he was delisted at one point, so there's a reason for no compensation for the Giants. So I have given Port Adelaide a rating of 6 out of 10. I think he's a solid depth player. Obviously couldn't get much game time with the Giants. He actually started the year pretty well and then was not able to get in the side later in the season. But he could slot nicely on the wing for Port. They probably need a solid player who can do a couple of roles. As I said, the wing and half back. So I think it could be a solid signing for Port Adelaide. The Giants, I gave him a 5 out of 10. They weren't really playing him. Probably the only reason why I gave him a 5 is, depth play. If they get injuries, they don't have him. So, I feel like it's just middle ground here. So 5 out of 10 for the Giants. Charlie Spargo off to North Melbourne, where Melbourne received the end of round 2 compensation pick, which is currently at pick 41. I've given North Melbourne a 6 out of 10 for Spargo. I think he'd definitely do a good job. He could be that kind of forward that runs up and down, which he did quite a bit of Melbourne. I think he's wanting a bit more of a role of kicking goals for North Melbourne, so we'll see what he can do there. Adds to the forward line of like Paul Curtis as well, so maybe a little bit more depth in that forward line spot. So I think it's a good little signing for North Melbourne. For Melbourne, I gave him a 5 out of 10. Didn't really get much. It's the end of round 2. He was a solid contributor for Melbourne. I think he'd be missed with that role. It's a really hard role to play that high half forward and potentially can kick some goals. So it's been unfortunate for Melbourne, but I think at the end of the day, they just have to move on from that. So I gave him a 5 out of 10. Now let's head to the trade. So the first trade is Liam Reidy going from Fremantle to Carlton. So Carlton received Reidy, 3rd round pick and a 4th round pick. And while Fremantle, they got a 3rd round pick and a 4th round pick. So essentially not really much was moved, just the player moving. So I give Carlton a 7 out of 10. Now people might think that might be a bit high given that he didn't really play at Fremantle. He had Darcy and Jackson well ahead of him. But I think given that they lost Tom to Koning and Pitnet is getting a bit older, I think it gives Reidy an absolute opportunity to really take the option of being the number 1 ruck. And I think it could be something similar to like a Lloyd Meek kind of example. Now, he was a Fremantle himself and went to Hawthorn, and look what he's become. He's become a great ruckman for him. And I believe Reidy can be the exact same thing for Cullen with what they need. And they didn't really give up too much for him, just some pick swaps around. So obviously a low risk for high gain for Carlton's sake. So 7 out of 10. Fremantle, I gave him a 5 out of 10. As I said before, didn't really give up much. Didn't really get much for him. But the fact that he was the 3rd choice ruck, say what happens if Darcy and Jackson get injured. Darcy's had a few injury issues. You never know with Jackson. And they don't really have someone like Reidy, which has been unfortunate. But at the same time, he wants an opportunity somewhere else. He can't say no to that, so understandable there. Sydney have acquired Malcolm Rosas Jr. from Gold Coast. So Sydney received Rosas Jr. and currently pick 62. Whereas Gold Coast, they got a 3rd and 4th round pick, currently at 51 and 69. So I've actually given Sydney a rating of 7 out of 10. I think it could be a good signing for Sydney, given that he didn't really have much opportunity at Gold Coast. He could slot into that small forward line, and that could actually free up someone like Papley to play more midfield. So he might get a bit of opportunity playing in that Sydney forward line. So I think it could be a good get for Sydney, potentially. And Gold Coast, I give them a 7 out of 10. As I said, he wasn't really playing at Gold Coast, and the couple of picks they get, it's going to be good for their academy picks they're getting this season in the draft. I think it's not a terrible one. I think it's actually quite decent for Gold Coast. They get a couple of picks and they offload a player that wasn't really playing. So I think it's a win for both sides. Next one, we have a three-way trade with Starcevich going to West Coast and some draft picks between Brisbane and Fremantle as well. So West Coast, as I said, they got Starcevich and pick 12 and pick 52, and they gave up 16, 22, and 23. Brisbane, well, they got the picks 16 and 22 and then 44 and 50, and obviously lost Starcevich. They got 19, 46 and 52 they lost. And then Freo, they got pick 19, 23 and 46. They lost 12, 33, 44 and 50. So for West Coast, I've actually given them an 8 out of 10. I think this is a great deal by them, given they get Starcevich, very reliable defender, which is actually one area they really do need. And they were able to trade a couple of their first round picks, but they're able to actually go up the draft order and go to currently at pick 12, and then they get a 3rd round pick. I think they did quite well, given, as I said, they get Starcevich and they got up the draft order as well, which is a fantastic work by the Eagles. So I give them an 8 out of 10. Brisbane, give them a 6 out of 10. I think Starcevich was bound to leave anyway, so I think they knew that was going to happen. They did get a 1st round pick for Starcevich in the end, and I think that's a pretty good deal, given he's a solid player, but obviously not a superstar in their team, and see what they can do with those picks, which they will use for a couple of their academy picks that they've got as well. So I think it's not too bad from Brisbane's point of view. As I said, they lose Starcevich, but I'm sure they could find someone to fill in that spot for him because they are a good side themselves. So 6 out of 10. Fremantle, I'll give them a 4 out of 10. I'm not sure what they have actually done here. So they pretty much got rid of pick 12 and pretty much got pick 19 and then pick 23. So I think what they've done is they've tried to get an extra pick, guess like that early 2nd round, but they got rid of a pick 12. So obviously they may have someone in mind maybe that probably will be a bit later. So I'm not entirely sure what they've done here. I don't know if it's the best move by them, but we'll see what happens in the draft for them. So giving them a 4. Speaking of Fremantle, they got Judd McVee from Melbourne. So second rounder, currently at pick 23 for McVee. I'm giving them a 7 out of 10 Fremantle. I think they did well. Another solid defender, just adds to their depth of defenders. He did say he didn't want to be a negating small defender. He wanted to be a running defender. And he feels like he could do that playing at Fremantle. Possibly could happen, but he'll have to have Jordan Clark with him. But it could work. He's got Clark and Chapman, unless Chapman plays that negating defender. So we'll see how Fremantle shuffle that around. But I think he's going to be a solid signing. He was actually quite good at Melbourne. So I think Melbourne did not really want to get rid of him. But unfortunately, I think it's just worked out well for Fremantle. So McVee, 7 out of 10. Melbourne, I've given them a 5 out of 10 for that reason. I didn't think they really wanted to lose him. But I think pick 23 actually isn't too bad of a deal for them. See if they can get someone good. But they just lose another solid defender into that Melbourne side. So it's a bit unfortunate. So I've given them a 5 out of 10. So Kilda have got Sam Flanders from Gold Coast. So pretty much Gold Coast receiving pick 7 for Flanders. So for St Kilda, I give this a 6 out of 10. It is a midfielder that they do need, that since now Jack Steele is now gone, and obviously something to support Wanganeen Miller and Windhager and the likes of Marshall and De Koning in the rucks. So he's a definitely accumulator, knows how to win the footy, so good player to get for St Kilda. But the fact that they gave up pick 7, that is a lot for someone like Flanders, who was kind of in and out of the team this season for Gold Coast. A lot to give, but they do need a good prolific midfielder who can win the footy. I think at the end of the day, it's good for them to get, but I think they gave up probably just a little bit more than what they should have for Flanders. For Gold Coast, I've given them an 8 out of 10. I think they did pretty well with this. They got a top 10 pick for a player that's pretty much not a first choice midfielder. He's not going to get ahead of Rao, Anderson, Took Miller, and now even Petracca going to be in there too. So I think getting that top 10 pick, it's perfect for them. As I said, they've got academy picks. They could potentially use this pick to get another player that could just add to their side. So I think they've got a good deal out of this. So that's why I've given it an 8 out of 10. This one's been coming for a while, but it's done. Oscar Allen going to Brisbane, and West Coast receiving the pick 2 as compensation. So Brisbane, I've given them an 8 out of 10. Potentially could be an absolute gun forward for them. Absolutely can help the likes of Logan Morris and Ty Gallup. Could put a very nice formidable forward line for Brisbane. Pretty much another gun forward since Joe Danaher. If he can stay fit in that case, if he does, definitely a great signing for basically nothing. West Coast, I've given them a 7 out of 10. Obviously, they did not want to lose one of their co-captains. But he's been a bit injured. I think they'll try to play games without him anyway, so I think they're getting used to it. And they got pick 2 out of it. That's unbelievable. They actually got the second pick in the draft as compensation. They can get a really solid player with that pick. That could really help this side. And writing was on the wall for Oscar Allen. Obviously, when he met with Sam Mitchell early in the season, pretty much from that point on, it just looked like he was going to leave. So I think it just works out for West Coast to get pick 2, get a good player out of it, and Oscar Allen goes to Brisbane. Liam Ryan heading to St Kilda. So St Kilda, they get Ryan and a 2027 third round pick. So this is a couple years away. And West Coast, will they receive the next year's second round pick? So I've given St Kilda an 8 out of 10 for this. I think this is a good get for him. You know, he's a real X factor. He did that for West Coast in some of the games even this year. You know, he's obviously a high-flying forward, as we know. He's gone into the midfield a few times, so, you know, could provide a little bit of that for St Kilda, but he'll be used mostly as a forward, especially with the fact that I think St Kilda's forward line is lacking that bit of quality. I know Jack Higgins had a great year there, and Max King hasn't really been playing as much. I think having Liam Ryan there is going to really help that forward line. Bit more dangerous with him being up there, so give him 8 out of 10. West Coast, give him 5 out of 10. They really didn't want to lose him. I think just losing that quality of Liam Ryan just kind of puts it back a little bit for West Coast, and really, they got a second round pick, I guess, out of it for next year, which could be okay, but at the end of the day, a bit of a bad loss for him, so give him a 5 out of 10. So Ruckman Max Heath heading to Melbourne, and this is in exchange for a 2027 fourth round pick. I've given Melbourne a 5 out of 10, but he's not really going to be playing at the start. Max Gawn is obviously ahead of him, and even Tom Campbell is probably still maybe a little bit ahead of him. But who knows, maybe in a couple of years when Max Gawn does decline in form or retires, he might be able to become that number one ruck and might become quite good. But at the moment, it's not really a prospect he's going to make an impact straight away, but potentially in the future, he could be. St Kilda give it a 5 out of 10 as well. Got a fourth round pick for him. Obviously, De Koning and Marshall are still there, so Heath was never really going to get a chance, so it's pretty obvious there. 5 out of 10 for St Kilda. Another Melbourne player going was Brody Mihocek from Collingwood. Melbourne receiving Mihocek and a third round pick, which is currently at pick 71. And Collingwood receiving a third round pick at 61 and next year's third round pick. Now, I've given Melbourne 8 out of 10. This is a good get. Now, given his age, I get it that he's hitting, I believe he's 32. I know he's a little bit older, but they have been crying out for a key forward that can just do a job, and Mihocek can definitely provide that for Melbourne. A bit more of a focal point, can maybe help Ben Royan as well. It could provide a formidable forward line. And you know what he's done at Collingwood? That's a solid player. I think he'll do the same for Melbourne, so I think it's a really good get. And they didn't really sacrifice too much with this, so maybe a little bit of, you can see some pick swaps, but really a third-round pick for Mihocek. I think that's a really good get for Melbourne. Collingwood, give them a 4 out of 10. I think given that they were in the prelim last year, losing Mihocek is a bit of a blow for him. As I said, he's just been such a good forward and really did help them when they won the flag. And even their run this year was good too. It's just another good key forward, pretty much a number one key forward in some ways. Now that he's gone, they're going to have to restructure it. Maybe Mason Cox stays and comes that forward, and maybe McStay can get into the team. At the end of the day, they didn't really get much. As I said, only a third-round pick, so it's a little bit disappointing. I know maybe given his age is probably the reason why it was that, but losing a player like his caliber for Collingwood is a bit of a blow. So see what happens, but 4 out of 10. Campbell Chesser's next. He went to Carlton for pick 41. And Carlton, I give them a 6 out of 10. I think he's a good depth midfielder for him. He was a first-round pick, I believe, that went to West Coast. He's come back, see if he can crack the Carlton midfield, see what he can do. See if he become a future gun midfielder for him. We'll see what happens with him. I think he'll be a solid player. Whether he'll be a gun midfielder remains to be seen, but I think he'll be a solid player for Carlton, so I've given him a 6 out of 10 for this trade. West Coast, give him a 5 out of 10. They didn't want to lose him. They did offer him a contract, but he did decline and wanted to go to Carlton. They did get pick 41, which is okay for someone like Chesser, so we'll see what happens if that pick 41 turns into anything special for West Coast, but the fact that he had to leave and just another midfielder depth lost. It's not ideal for West Coast, so 5 out of 10. Next, we got the freeway trade, which had Ainsworth going to Carlton and Durdin going to Port Adelaide. Carlton receiving Ainsworth and currently pick 67. And they did lose Durdin and also a second-round pick, which they gave to Gold Coast. And well, as you can see, Gold Coast basically was a second-round pick for Ainsworth. And Port Adelaide, well, they got Durdin and a 2026 second-round pick, so next year's second-round pick, and they got rid of their current second-round pick, which was 29, and their fourth-round pick, which is 67. So for Port Adelaide, I actually gave them a 7 out of 10. I think they did quite well. So essentially what they did is they got a small forward, which they really needed, and they basically just got rid of their current second-round pick to get a future second-round pick, which they may need to use potentially for Doug Cochran if he does end up going as an NGA for Port Adelaide. We'll see on that one. So, and basically they just got a fourth-round pick. They had to get rid of for Durdin, which I think is a good get, given that he could be solid forward for him. Coming back to South Australia could do some good for him where they're lacking that small forward. So 7 out of 10 for Port Adelaide. Carlton, I've given them a 7. Ainsworth, I think, is an upgrade on Durdin. I think he will definitely provide something a bit different to that Carlton forward line. And a second-round pick actually isn't too bad to actually give up for him. So I think it's actually a decent deal in the end. So 7 out of 10 for Carlton as well. And also for Gold Coast, I've actually given them a 7 as well. I think Ainsworth, he probably would have been in the Gold Coast team next year. But given that the players they have signed, like Petracca and Ugle-Hagan and all that, and given there's some small forwards coming in like Rogers that can do a job, I think a second-round pick, which they can also use for the academy, is actually going to be all right. And, losing Ben Ainsworth may not be the worst thing for him. So 7 out of 10 from there. Tyler Young has moved west to join West Coast and is in exchange for pick 38. So West Coast have given a 7 out of 10. He's a key defender that they do need West Coast, and he could definitely look very nicely. Could slot in. And obviously with Starcevich coming too, the defense looks a little bit more solidified, which is actually good for West Coast's sake. And they only had to give up a second-round pick, which is not too bad. So 7 out of 10 for me. Richmond, give it 5 out of 10. I didn't think they wanted to lose Tyler Young. He's been solid for him in that defence. So just leaves a bit of a hole that they have to fill in. So 5 out of 10 for me. Port Adelaide getting Will Brodie for pick 103. How about that? Just goes into the 3 figures. So Port Adelaide, giving them a 6 out of 10. Good bit of depth in there. Ollie Wines is out for the first 2 rounds, so he actually pleads a case to potentially start in that midfield, which actually could be very handy for him. So 6 out of 10 for me. And for Freo, give him a 5 out of 10. They did this instead of listing him, so they didn't have to pay out his contract. So it was actually okay for him. He didn't really play that much at all. I don't think he's played in the last couple of years, I think, for Fremantle. So he hasn't really done too much, so it's not the end of the world for them at all. So 5 out of 10. Next, we've got Brayden Fiorini going to Essendon for a future third round pick, which is next year's third round pick. Essendon, give them a 7 out of 10. I think it's a good get for him. Add that bit of experience to the young Essendon side they have. Looks like he's most likely going to play on the wing, which is going to be good for him. Him on one side, Dursman on the other potentially. Might be quite a formidable wing pairing that they've got. And now they've kept Merritt in that team. So Fiorini definitely makes Essendon a little bit stronger with his depth and with his experience. So I think it's a good get from Essendon. And only using a future third round pick for him actually isn't too bad. Given Gold Coast a rating of 5 out of 10, they did actually offer him a deal to stay, but he ended up not going. He actually solidified himself in the team as a wingman at Gold Coast. He looked all right there. So it was a bit of a shame for them. Only really getting a third round pick for Fiorini as well, who actually was playing all right for him. Not ideal for them to lose that bit of depth, but it is what it is for them. 5 out of 10. Next, we've got Connor Budarick going to the Western Bulldogs. So they receive Budarick and pick 70, and Gold Coast get pick 37 as a result of it. So the Bulldogs, I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. I'm not entirely sure why they went for this one for Budarick, because he's been a bit in and out for Gold Coast. I think he's going to be like that small defender, potentially. I know he's playing sometimes a bit more of a small forward at times, but I think maybe a small defender. I don't know if they really need that. I know they need key defenders, but small defender, I'm not entirely sure if they need that. Who knows, he might do okay there. So just 5 out of 10 for now. Gold Coast, 6 out of 10. As I said, he was bitten in and out of the side for the Suns. They did get a second round pick. Obviously had to give up their fourth round. But a second round pick actually is pretty decent for that, and they can use that for this draft. Ollie Florent heading to Carlton for a next year's third round pick. I've given Carlton a 7 out of 10. I actually think Florent is a solid player. He actually was quite good at Sydney until the second half of last season, given that Sydney just didn't really want to play him as much. But he's definitely got the potential to be a really good player. You know, you could play him off halfback, you could play him on a wing. It really depends how Carlton will utilise his attributes. But I think he's a very good running player. He's a good user of the footy. So I think he'd be a very good signing for Carlton. And only getting rid of a future third round for him, I think, is pretty good. Given that I think he was still on a 3 or 4 year contract at this point, Sydney. So I think that might have played a part in only being a third round pick. So ideal for Carlton there, 7 out of 10. Sydney, I go 6 out of 10. As I probably said before, he was pretty much out of their side, and he was kind of on a long-term contract, I think 3 to 4 years, as I said. So obviously I wanted to offload him. They really wanted to offload him in the Curnow deal, but that didn't end up happening, but that didn't matter in the end. So I think it's 6 out of 10, given that they got to get rid of his contract and also get rid of him, given that he didn't really play as much. So third rounder is okay for him. So we have Jiath heading to Melbourne, and it's for pick 42 and future fourth round pick. I've given Melbourne a 7 out of 10. It's going to be a good rebounding defender that they're going to need. He might potentially replace Judd McVee. Whether he plays as an again defender, we'll see. But definitely a rebounding defender. Works well with Bowie and Salem. Could be a very good signing. Or they potentially might play him on a wing. Let's see what happens. But I think this is a good get by Melbourne. I think he'll definitely do a good job, given that he was on the outer at Hawthorn. So there's going to be a good stuff here from Melbourne, and I think he'll be a good signing for them. Hawthorn, give it a 5 out of 10. I know he was on the outer, but, you know, he would have been a good player to keep at Hawthorn. I still think he had the potential to be in that starting lineup, but they did get the second round and a future fourth round for him, so they did get something out of him. Jai Serong heading to Sydney from Hawthorn. So Sydney get Serong and a future fourth round pick, otherwise Hawthorn receive a future third round pick. I've given Sydney a 7 out of 10. I actually think this could be a really good signing, given that he just did not have any game time at Hawthorn. He was very good in the VFL, and I think Sydney do need another strong key defender, and he can really fill that void for him, can really solidify himself in that defence. Could be a good get for Sydney. So 7 out of 10, given that they didn't really spend too much on him either. Hawthorn, I go 6 out of 10. They won't really play him. I don't think they ever will going to play him. They got a third round future for him, so they could potentially use that for future drafting or potentially trading. So at the end of the day, I think 6, pretty fair rating for them, given that they weren't really playing him. And now we go to the surprise of the trade period was Finnbar Maley, going from North Melbourne to the Adelaide Crows. So the Crows getting Maley and a fourth round pick, which is currently at 64, and North Melbourne receiving a pick 57 and a future fourth round pick. I've given the Crows a 6 out of 10. You know, it could have the potential to be a good key forward. I feel like they're signing him for that depth reason, and potentially could be a replacement for Taylor Walker when he retires. So potentially could be something. He did show some sort of potential at North Melbourne with a few of his games. So obviously the Crows saw that and thinking they need a bit of a key forward. So potentially could be a good little signing for him, and actually didn't give up much. So 6 out of 10 for the Crows. North Melbourne, I got a 5 out of 10. I don't know if they really wanted to lose him, other than having like Larkey in that team, who's their next really up-and-coming forward. He probably was up there on that list, but unfortunately it just didn't quite work, and really they didn't get much in return for him, so 5 out of 10 for me. Jamara Ugle-Hagan has found his way to Gold Coast for a pick 74. Now, Gold Coast, I've actually given this an 8 out of 10. I reckon this is potentially could be the trade of the year, potentially. Given that his potential, former number 1 pick, showed some really good promise at the Bulldogs. Obviously, the off-field issues and him not being around at the club this year has really questioned pretty much everyone in the AFL industry whether he's actually still keen to play footy or whether he's actually committed enough to keep going. But let's see what happens with this one. I actually think if they can really get that going, they obviously got all these clauses in the contract to see if there anything like this similar happens to what happened to the Bulldogs, that, you know, he'll probably get terminated most likely. But if he can get back to what he was able to do at the Bulldogs at his peak and able to, you know, overcome those off-field issues, this could be an amazing signing for something so cheap. A 4th-round pick for him could really slot into that Gold Coast forward line. Could be even very potent having him with Ben King and then a few other players as well. It just could be even more potent than ever. So this could be a really good signing. It could potentially be the worst signing. But I've gone, it's a low risk for high reward, I feel, for someone like him, given that, you know, if worst comes to worst, they could just terminate the contract. But the reward could be an absolute star forward. So potentially could be a good one for him. Bulldogs go 4 out of 10. Obviously, the way it happened, the circumstances, you know, they really had no choice. But giving up only getting picked 74 for pretty much a number 1 pick that they had is very disappointing in how it all ended. So that's why I've given it a 4 out of 10. Jack Buller heading to Collingwood. So Collingwood get Buller and a future 4th-round pick, and Sydney get a future 3rd-round pick for him. So 6 out of 10 from Collingwood. They lost Mihocek. Could they replace him with Buller? Remains to be seen. He did play a few games at Sydney. I'm not entirely convinced whether he will be that main man for Collingwood, but could potentially be that. Let's see what happens with that. But 6 out of 10, given that Collingwood needed a key forward, and they've got that. In Sydney, I go 6 out of 10 as well. They did get a future 3rd-round pick. Buller was playing, but you know they did have injuries like no Logan McDonald and Joel Amartey, so that's why he was in. So I don't see him really being in that team anyway. And now that they got Charlie Curnow, I didn't see much of a chance of him being there anyway. So 6 out of 10 for me. So we have Geelong rookie Patrick Retschko going to Richmond, pretty much for a 6th-round pick 99. Now, I believe Geelong might have actually just delisted him just before this trade actually happened, but Richmond wanted to get him straight away rather than waiting a little bit later. So I've given Richmond a 5 out of 10. So this guy was going to be delisted, but could be potentially see what he could do at Richmond. Let's see what happens. So 5 out of 10. Geelong, 5 out of 10 as well. They get a 6th-round pick for someone that we're going to delist anyway. So we leave it as that. And now we go to one of the big trades. Christian Petracca going to Gold Coast. Gold Coast. So obviously getting Petracca and getting picks 24 and 28 and also a future 2nd-round pick. And Melbourne receiving pretty much 2 1st-round picks this season, or this year, I should say, pick 7 and 8. And then you got next year's 1st-round pick, and then this year's 2nd-round pick, and then a future 3rd-round pick. Now, I am going to give Gold Coast, might be a bit harsh here, but I'm giving them a 5 out of 10 for this. I think they gave up quite a lot for Petracca. Now, we know how good he is. We know how much of a gun he was. He's won a Norm Smith. He's been a superstar for so long. But I feel like potentially, is he on the decline? That's what I'm wondering about him now. I know he's like 29. I think he's about to turn 30. And, you know, there is still some good footy he can play, and he can still be an absolute star at Gold Coast. There's no doubt about it. But it's just whether he will be that. And given that they gave up quite a lot for him, they're expecting him to be the superstar straight away. But I think he'll be good there. But whether he will be that absolute star that he was at Melbourne remains to be seen. And I think they just gave up maybe a little bit too much for him. But let's just see what happens. So 5 out of 10 for this one. And for Melbourne, I've given them an 8 out of 10. I actually think they did really well, given the circumstances that Petracca wanted to leave. He goes to Gold Coast. They get 3 1st-round picks, which they could use. And they can start rebuilding their list. Given that they actually were going to rebuild anyway, and a lot of the players were on the outer, they wanted to get the ball rolling straight away. I think it's a very good deal for what they got. And as I said, I think Petracca just wasn't happy at Melbourne, it looked like. And it doesn't look like he's going to be at his prolific best of what he was, in the past for Melbourne. So I think they actually cashed in at the right time in this situation. So I think they did quite well. So 8 out of 10 for me. The former St Kilda captain, Jack Steele, heading to Melbourne for a future 3rd-round pick. Giving Melbourne a 7 out of 10. I think he's going to be a very solid midfielder for him. He was on the outer at St Kilda. And now, given that there's no Petracca and Oliver, I think it'd be good to have in that midfield with Gawn and Viney, especially in the short term, given that there's a lot of youngsters in this Melbourne side. So I think you'll help with that experience. I think you're going to be a good signing for them. 7 out of 10 for me. St Kilda, 5 out of 10. I think it's a bit disappointing how this whole happened. And they got a 3rd round pick for Steele, their former captain as well. Now, well, actually, it was his captain now, former captain, now that he's been traded. So it's a little bit disappointing the way it ended. So 5 out of 10 for St Kilda. So next, Clayton Oliver, heading to GWS Giants for a future 3rd round pick. Now, I've actually given this 9 out of 10. I think this is the best trade in this trade period. Given that, from what I'm hearing, that Melbourne are willing to pay half the salary for Clayton Oliver, so they may only have to pay like $700K, and they got him pretty cheap, I think, for a future 3rd round pick, for a player he's been an All-Australian, he's been an absolute star at Melbourne, and given that now Josh Kelly's going to be out for majority of 2026, he'll slot in nicely into that midfield with Tom Green and Finn Callaghan. I think it's going to be a very strong midfield, so I think he's going to be brilliant there, and especially away from the Melbourne spotlight, heading into Western Sydney, I think it's going to suit him so well. And potentially, it's just going to be great. The only thing is obviously his off-field issues, but maybe being in a different state will help him overcome that stuff, and he'll be at his best. I think it's going to be a great signing for them, for the Giants. Melbourne, I'm giving them a 3 out of 10. I think it's just the whole thing that happened. You know, they had the meeting with him. They pretty much in 12 minutes said, we don't want you anymore. They're willing to pay half his salary, and really, for a player of his caliber, only getting a future 3rd round pick back for him is very disappointing. So I think it's one of the worst trades they've done in this situation. So 3 out of 10 for me. And the last trade that we've got, it's the one including Charlie Curnow to Sydney and Will Hayward going to Carlton. So Sydney, they get Curnow and 2 second round picks, 31 and 42, and a future 2nd round pick, whereas Carlton receive Will Hayward and they get a pick 11, and they get 1st round picks from 2026 and 2027. So essentially, 3 first rounders and Will Hayward Carlton got. So Sydney, I'm giving them a 6 out of 10. I think probably similar to the Petracca situation. I feel like they may have given a little bit too much for someone like Curnow, who, you know, last year was quite injury riddled. Is he going to be able to get back to his Coleman medal best? I'm not too sure. I think he's definitely a player they do need. They really do need a really good key forward. And if he gets, you know, remotely back to his form, he's going to be a great signing for him. But I think it's just, there's a tiny bit of a risk given the age as well and the injuries he's had in the past and how much they gave up for him. But if it works out, this could be an absolutely amazing signing. And you can clearly see that Sydney believe they're in the premiership window by giving up quite a bit there, and also Will Hayward to get Curnow into their team. So we'll see how we go with it, but 6 out of 10 for me. Carlton, I'm going with a 7 out of 10. Now, it looks like Curnow was on the outer. You could kind of see that throughout the year, so you know, it's a bit disappointing because you lose a 2-time comp medalist. It's not ideal for them, but the thing they get 3 first-round picks, so they can kind of rebuild a little bit, and they get Will Hayward, who I think is a very solid forward. He only just re-signed at Sydney as well, which is a bit disappointing for him that he was part of the trade bait. But I think he'd be a good signing. Him and Ainsworth being up forward, and with like Mackay, it actually might be not too bad of a forward line for him. I think they did pretty well getting the 3 first rounders and Will Hayward along with that. So I think I give that as a little win for him, given that it looks like Curnow was looking like always going to leave. So 7 out of 10 for me. Now, comment down below your opinion of this trade period. Do you agree with these ratings, or do you think I was a bit harsh, or do you think I was a bit too lenient? Let me know. If you enjoyed this content, please give it a like and subscribe if you are new here. Thank you so much for watching this. I really do appreciate it. If you want to watch more of my content, have a look at this video here. I think you will enjoy it.